Hi everyone, my name is Contos and I'm currently based in London this year as I just finished off my MA in Gender, Education, International Development. This is why unfortunately I can't be with you live today because of the time zones, and I'm conscious that I don't have that much time to speak, so I'm going to go through quite quickly and tick off as many kind of aspects as I can while talking to you today about how we can create a culture where children can be safe in schools and what your role is as parents specifically in the situation. So, as parents, you're important for two reasons. Firstly, while education at school is a great way to shape a culture, and I personally think one of the most effective ways in order to kind of change a whole generation's culture, if the message that children are hearing or seeing at home is completely contradictory to this, they can learn about, consent and respectful relationships and all these things all they want at school, and it will be invalid. And secondly, you're essentially clients of the school, and the school wants to make sure that you are happy with the standard of your child's education. So I'm just going to flag a trigger warning for this session. There will be discussions of sexual assault quite high level in my talk today. So one of the first things, it sounds quite simple, but it's massive, and it's language. It's the language you use when you communicate with your child, especially from a young age. So for example, I have very clear memories of reporting to my parents, my mum, for example, that I got wolf whistled. And I'm not saying that this was bad of her to do because, this is what was normal for her. But the kind of response I got was, oh, it's because you're pretty. I remember when I used to get wolf whistled, I wish someone would wolf whistle me these days. Or kind of, if someone I feel like a lot of the time it's very common for older women to make jokes about being like, oh, I wish I got hit on and those sort of things. What that does is that normalizes sexual objectification to your child. And most of the time it is the girls who are getting wolf whistled at. But the problems can also lie there in if your sons are hearing that conversation with your daughters and hearing you tell them that that's a compliment, it may mean that it's also normalized for your sons to do things like wolf whistle people on the street. Another massive one that I hear reported to me a lot, and that again I can speak to personal experience from is being told, change your top, you'll get raped, or put on a jacket, you'll get raped. I know that in the short term we don't live in an ideal world, and unfortunately there are lots of people out there who see provocative clothing and take that as an invitation to sexually objectify or to harass or to sexually assault. But in reality, whilst we do need to keep our children safe, we also need to change the language around it so that no blame is being put on the potential victim in the situation. So for example, instead of saying change your top, you'll get raped, you say change your top or take a jacket with you because there are really bad people out there and they may do bad things because they don't understand that that is not an entrance to your body. So making sure that whilst you're keeping your children safe, you're also reiterating this message of the fact that it is not their fault, because what you can accidentally do is create an environment where they feel they can't come to you or they can't come to the school. So the next topic I'm going to talk about is a bit of an elephant in the room, and it's pornography. So you kind of have two options as parents. You can either take it upon yourselves to have these conversations with children at home, or you can heavily encourage your school and request that this kind of education and conversation is outsourced and discussed in a way that is, relevant to the students by an external party with their peers around, those sort of things. But the reality is that the way that children access pornography these days is, one, unprecedented, and two, completely different to the way that pornography was accessible when perhaps you were growing up, or even when I was growing up. I mean, it is just exponential and infinite. The things that children need to know about pornography is they need to know it's not real. They need to know that the people in these videos are paid actors. They need to know that they're not expected to do that and they can't expect anyone to do the things they see on there. And again, when having these conversations, it can be awkward, but what you need to create is basically an open situation with your children, so they feel like they can, talk to you if they know what pornography is. So if, especially if they're in their primary years, they know about this concept of it and that, it's not something they should be doing. They know it's a bad thing, however you parent whatever words you use. so that if someone does show them pornography at school, you can make sure that they're safe. You can make sure that they report it to you, and that they don't feel like that there's this massive taboo around this subject and that they could never possibly talk to you about it. Again, I'm just going to jump back to language as a point now, but in a different way. So instead of the way that you directly speak to your children about things, the language you use at home when they're around. So the way you engage in media, for example, if there's a segment on TV about a sexual assault, if there's a segment on TV about, some sort of domestic violence, the language you use to talk about the victim in that situation, knowing that your children are listening to that and learning from that, both for their own views and knowing they're learning if they can come to you with these sort of things. I remember very clearly my parents both victim blaming someone that was, a high profile sexual assault case going on in Sydney when I was a teenager, and I remember crying. It was probably the biggest argument I ever had with my parents, screaming, and I was so emotional about it. I never used to scream, but I was yelling at them, and it was because I knew in that moment that I had been sexually assaulted, and that if this was the reaction, I almost felt like they were reacting to me without knowing they were reacting to me, and the sort of things they were saying made me really, really uncomfortable. Another thing is if you have created a safe environment with your child, which I hope you do, within the school and within home life, there's a 1 in 5 chance that if you have a daughter, she'll be sexually assaulted from the age of 15. I also want to add in here that it's actually more likely for an Australian female at the moment to be sexually assaulted than it is for them to smoke daily. And when we think about it like that, it's pretty crazy the effort that parents go into to kind of making sure that their children are educated on smoking and knowing that it's a bad thing and not to do it and all these things, but how little conversation and resources goes into the prevention of sexual assault, even though it's more likely, girls more likely to be a victim of it than smoking. Anyway, I'll go back to the thing now, but if they, if you have created a safe environment, what your instinctive reaction may be if they ever do report a sexual assault to you or the school, because the safer the environment you create, the more likely they will feel they can come forward with this sort of information if they are unsafe. Your first instinct may be to be very angry and want to report it, and be angry at the perpetrator and want to make sure that your child's safe and all these things. But the best thing you can do is compose yourself, because the situation is harder for your child than it is for you, and ask them what they need and how you can help and how you can support them through that. But a big reason that people don't report is because they don't want it to go through the court process, which is another reason that people often report to parents instead of teachers, because it's up to the parents how they want to proceed with that sort of information. Some other things I want to go over is for young students especially. It's really important as parents to empower them with language and again encourage your schools to be having these conversations with children. For young people, it's really important for them to know the difference between their vagina, their vulva, their labia, all of these things. So if they ever are in a horrible situation, which I really hope they're not, they're equipped with the language and empowered with the tools to be able to actually talk about what happened to them, which again, if you had this whole taboo around that situation, the same way if there's a taboo around pornography and they feel they can't report to you if they've seen it at school or something like that, taboo around their private parts can be really dangerous for young students, because it means that they may not disclose. And I mean, it's not just young students, there's kind of that inherent shame and taboo kind of carries through all through life, especially people socialized as girls. Something I want to add as well is essentially the safest way as parents that you can create a safe school environment, and this is really hard to hear, but it's essentially how you socialize your sons. So 97% of sexual assault cases in Australia, in the world, I can't remember if it's Australia or the world, I should definitely know that, are perpetrated by men. And this stat is definitely in Australia. 50% of sexual assault cases that are perpetrated by a woman, they're co-offending with a man, So in terms of an allocation of resources, we can really see that it is the way that young boys and men are socialized. And what you can do is make sure that you grow up your children, especially your sons, with kind of respect and an understanding of boundaries and empathy. Because consent really is just that, it is just empathy. And what we have is we have this problem in young years where there's so much pressure for students to engage in sexual activity. Pornography is their main form of sex education. They're not getting any counteractive information from other sources like school or parents if it's not in the curriculum, and if their parents don't feel equipped to have these conversations with them. And the boys are often succumbing to peer pressure themselves to engage in sexual activity, but really the prevention can start there. And what I want to do very quickly, I just want to kind of emphasize that a rapist is not, they're not kind of the stereotype of what we see a rapist as. The type of rapist that kind of like lurks in alleyways and, pounces on someone after midnight, or the type of rapist who grabs you in a park or pulls over to the side of the road and, randomly attacks a victim. They are very, very, very rare. And a lot of resources need to go into an individual person from a very young age to prevent that type of sexual assault and rape, because it's on their parents and their teachers to understand that those type of people are not good people, and they themselves have often endured trauma themselves. And I mean, the chances that the fact that you're all here today going above and beyond the school curriculum to see what you can do as parents shows that it's very, very, very unlikely that that's the type of person that your son may be. But the type of person that your son may be that may lead them to sexually assault someone is a lesser understood rapist that kind of breaks all stereotypes of sexual assault, but is also the most common offender by far. They're called opportunistic rapists, and I call them entitled opportunists. And essentially these type of people, they're almost always men, they essentially don't have an understanding of consent, and they value their sexual gratification in a situation above the person in front of them. Again, we have a situation where people are learning how to have sex from pornography and portraying what they may be seeing there, where no consent is included, / it's often very misogynistic or derogatory to women. We also have a situation where conversations about female sexuality and young girls' role in sex are almost never spoken about in our society. And what can happen there is young boys and men often perpetrate sexual assault having no idea that they have until they're older. And that's very classic of an opportunistic rapist. It's almost as if it's not a question of was consent given or not, it's I didn't know that I had to get consent because all media I've ever engaged with hasn't portrayed that to me, and I've never had these sort of conversations before. And these type of offenders offend by, potentially purposely getting someone drunk because, they're easier if they're drunk or something like that. Or, if someone's unconscious or too intoxicated to consent, they don't know that those situations mean that they can't engage in sexual activity. So it's very common that these type of rapists accidentally perpetrate sexual assault. And although it's very hard to, think of your son as ever being someone who would do that, the reality is there's 1 in 5 girls being sexually assaulted. If you have a daughter, there's a 1 in 5 chance from the age of 15 she'll be sexually assaulted. And I mean, I always think about that statistic a lot because I was sexually assaulted under the age of 15, so I'm not even included in that statistic. And so many young girls and women on my website reported on, 13, 14, these kind of formative years where you're left very vulnerable. So if 1 in 5 people who are girls are being sexually assaulted, it means it's not the same perpetrator sexually assaulting everyone. So it's hard to grapple with, but it's all about raising your boys with empathy and consideration and understanding of people's bodies and boundaries and being able to accept no's, and at the same time socializing girls to be able to say no and to feel empowered in their own skin and assertive. So essentially I know I lobby for consent education mandated in schools, and I do believe that is kind of the way to move forward as a society. One of the ways, one of the many ways, but a good step forward. But that really is the absolute bare minimum. What we need is we need parents also being engaged in this conversation and creating safe spaces in schools by the way they do things at home. And not everyone has involved parents the way that you are. The fact that you're here today is telling of the fact that you want to do better. But it means that you can really take that upon yourself to, make this culture better for your students and also for your children, and also making sure that your children are empowered to kind of not be bystanders in situations, and so that they know what's right and what's wrong. I've gone over time, so I will leave you there, but I hope that was helpful and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the webinar. Thank you very much.